On January 30th, 2026, the United States Department of Justice released a substantial collection of internal materials connected to J.P. Morgan Chase's private banking operations. According to journalists and legal analysts who reviewed portions of these records, the documents span roughly 15 years and reference financial activity linked to accounts associated with Jeffrey Epstein between the late 1990s and early 2010s. Based on investigative reporting, the materials suggest that J.P. Morgan processed transactions totaling more than $1 billion for Epstein-related entities during that period, even as internal compliance systems reportedly generated repeated alerts. Journalistic summaries of the files indicate that, on multiple occasions, those alerts were overwritten through internal discretionary processes. As of early 2026, the focus of inquiry appears to have shifted away from isolated compliance failures and toward what analysts describe as a broader structural issue: the financial pipeline that allows high-net-worth capital to move across borders with limited friction. To understand how such a system can persist, one must look beyond daily headlines and examine the deeper mechanics of financial power. Welcome to the Matrix. If that opening feels unsettling, that's the point. What regulators often describe as systemic failure is, from another perspective, simply how the architecture operates under normal conditions. In Currency Wars, Song Hongbing frames modern banking not as a neutral service industry, but as an infrastructure of control, arguing that those who manage the flow of capital do not merely serve governments, they shape the boundaries within which governments act. Many people view banks as passive custodians of deposits. Large financial institutions, however, function as gatekeepers of liquidity. Investigative accounts suggest that when a client operates at a certain scale, the relationship shifts. The bank is no longer just a service provider. It becomes part of the client's operating environment. From this lens, compliance failures are not always accidental. They can be byproducts of incentive structures embedded deep within the system itself. Reports summarizing the 2026 disclosures indicate that override authority within J.P. Morgan's asset and wealth management structure was exercised several times in relation to Epstein-linked accounts. Analysts reviewing these materials emphasize that such actions, if accurately described, point less to individual misconduct and more to a culture where regulatory friction is treated as something to be navigated rather than confronted. The law exists, but it moves slowly. Capital moves fast. In Currency Wars, Song Hongbing introduces the idea that financial dynasties survive not by avoiding rules, but by becoming too systemically important to confront directly. In that framework, enforcement becomes selective. Small accounts are frozen over minor irregularities, while vast sums move through internal pipelines under layers of discretion. The system audits the periphery rigorously, while the core remains insulated. Public filings indicate that only a fraction of the total transaction volume associated with Epstein was formally reported as suspicious at the time. Journalistic reconstructions suggest a dramatic disparity between what internal systems flagged and what ultimately reached regulators. Whether this gap reflects legal gray zones, institutional inertia, or strategic silence is precisely what investigators and analysts continue to debate. What Currency Wars describes as the invisible tax emerges here. When capital flows are managed asymmetrically, the public absorbs the cost, while insiders harvest stability. Liquidity generated in opaque corners of the system does not disappear. It is recycled into balance sheets, fee structures, and market influence. The pipeline does not break. It concentrates. As of early 2026, despite the volume of documentation released and the intensity of public discussion, the core structure of this pipeline appears unchanged. Executives remain in place, institutions remain solvent, and the system continues to function as designed. Rent, wages, and savings still move upward through channels few ever see, becoming exit liquidity for someone else's next position. Separate investigative reports, released in early February 2026, reference additional declassified records connected to financial communications during the 2011 Eurozone crisis. According to journalists who examined these materials, certain politically connected intermediaries may have had early exposure to non-public policy discussions surrounding proposed European bailout mechanisms. Analysts note that such early informational access, if accurately represented, would have created conditions for highly asymmetric market positioning across sovereign debt and currency markets. This pattern is not new. Song Hongbing recounts the well-known Waterloo narrative involving Nathan Rothschild, emphasizing not the legend itself, but the underlying principle: information asymmetry. The advantage was never speed alone. It was proximity to decision-making before decisions became public knowledge. Modern markets did not abandon this principle. They scaled it. Contemporary investigative summaries suggest that during periods of macro-level crisis, sensitive policy discussions can circulate through private financial networks before formal announcements occur. When this happens, volatility becomes a resource rather than a threat. Institutional actors are not gambling on outcomes. They are positioning around probabilities shaped by early signals. Retail participants react to headlines. Institutions, by contrast, operate closer to where those headlines originate. This gap is where what Song Hongbing calls the invisible tax is collected. Losses are socialized through uncertainty, while gains are concentrated through foresight. When financial leaders speak publicly about market stability, analysts argue the critical question is stability for whom? Controlled volatility is profitable when exits are known in advance. The historical playbook never disappeared. It evolved alongside technology and regulation. Information still moves faster than oversight, and power still accumulates where pipelines converge. From this perspective, the documents reviewed in 2026 do not necessarily depict a system in crisis, but a system functioning exactly as it was built to function.